Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm your host, Carl Cranney. I have a PhD in religion and have written on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture. And we have a great panel with us today. Of course, joining us is my co-host, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Busby. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy, a reviewer of books, and a Latter-day Saint.
And Ben, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, my name is Ben Pacini. I'm faculty at BYU-Idaho in elementary, early, and special education. Taught math in middle school for a long time, and I'm a big Bluey fan.
And Cassandra, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Hedelius. I am a retired lawyer, retired in order to be the stay-at-home mom to my 4 kids, ages 7, 5, 3, and baby. I also write stuff. I volunteer for FAIR. I have seen every episode of Bluey multiple times. I've also seen Bluey's big play on stage, and I made this magnificent Bluey. So clearly, I'm very qualified today.
For those of you listening to the podcast version, you should go to the YouTube version just for a second to see the enormous Bluey that Cassandra knitted and created herself.
Oh, I didn't knit it. Good heavens.
Oh, I don't know what the term is.
It's sewed out
but
of craft belt. Knitting would take roughly an eternity. No.
Sure, fine. I'm sorry, my ignorance is showing, but there's an enormous Bluey behind Cassandra that she made herself, and it is glorious, as you can already tell. We're going to be talking today about Bluey, the Australian animated TV show about a family of anthropomorphic dogs and the hijinks they get up to through the course of their lives. It is streaming on Disney Plus right now. But first, we're going to do our best books segment where we each recommend one thing that we are watching, reading, or listening to. I thought we would do a theme this time. When we did our Free Guy episode, we all recommended video games that we had played or had enjoyed. And this time I thought we'd try to recommend something that we could enjoy watching or reading or participating in with our children, much like Bluey. So it's on brand for this particular episode. The ones that I'm going to recommend, I know I've recommended it before, but Star Trek Prodigy is, to my mind, one of the better Star Trek shows that has ever come out. Like Next Generation and Deep Space Nine always seem to take my first and second slots depending on what my mood is. But I'm pretty sure that Prodigy is up there as well. It's written for young teenagers, maybe a little younger than that, but it still gets into a lot of the heart of Star Trek about cooperation between different species and sort of the ethics of how to be a spacefaring race among different cultures and just all sorts of really good and interesting questions that I enjoy. One that I'm not going to recommend is one that came out a couple weeks ago on Disney Plus called Young Jedi Adventures. I watched the first episode and I had to slog through it, and it is the most pedantic and just saccharine little thing you could ever possibly. I can't even imagine. They've said it in the High Republic era, which is their new way of saying all the stuff before Anakin Skywalker showed up and destroyed the Jedi Order, which is good because I thought that's a bold move, Disney Plus, doing a TV show about a bunch of young Jedi children when we all know what happens when Order 66 happens and Anakin shows up and murders a bunch of them. So anyway, it's well before that, apparently, in the timeline, so that's good. And sorry I'm going on so long, but the last one I'd really recommend is Phineas and Ferb, which is an absolutely fun ride to participate in. Susan and I watched it before we even had kids, and it is fun. It is interesting. Every episode has got a lot of very good humor in it, and as a sign of how well written it is, to my mind, the most well-developed time travel series I've ever watched.
This is the one with Schmertz, right?
Yes, Dr. Doofenshmirtz and Perry the Platypus.
My kids love it. They all love it.
It is a fantastic show. So anyway, those are 2 that I recommend that you could watch with your kids and all enjoy, and one that I guess your kids can watch the Star Wars one if you want, but I recommend going somewhere else and doing something else. But anyway, Liz, what do you have for us this time?
I'm just going to second that Phineas and Ferb recommendation. That was our pandemic series. It got us through summer 2020. So it's a fantastic show. I've been rewatching with my kids the Carmen Sandiego reboot on Netflix. We've watched it through once and it holds up to being rewatched. It's just really smartly written. A little bit of nostalgia for those of us who grew up watching the game show version and then the animated TV series and playing this silly little video games. So I really enjoy Carmen Sandiego. It's on Netflix. And then, of course, if you haven't watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, you need to stop listening to this podcast and go watch Avatar: The Last Airbender because it's the best animated show ever. And I will stand by that. Possibly the best complete arc of a TV series ever. And it is fantastic. So go and watch those, whether you have kids or not, but they are great for kids, all ages.
I heartily second the recommendation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is, I'm comfortable saying, it's probably one of the best television shows ever. I don't know how else to explain that there is a TV show for kids where towards the end they have a ethical debate about whether they need to murder the equivalent of Hitler in their universe. You see the main character wrestling with this question of how to fight a war against someone, but do so in a manner that is ethical and upholds the tradition of the Avatar of bringing balance to the world. And it's a fantastic show.
Plus, it adds so many great memes that you can use in your real life. Like we were putting on aloe vera and I told my kids it was cactus juice. They will quench you. And of course, every time we go through a tunnel, we have to sing Secret Tunnel.
Ben, what have you got for us?
Well, I have to say really quick, I love that our intro to Bluey is let's talk about murdering Hitler and then Anakin Skywalker and kids. I feel like with Avatar, they wrote it for kids and they take kids seriously. Joyful, funny, mischievous, but also like potential heroes. And kids love moral drama and they love to ask questions about right and wrong. And it's one of the few where it doesn't feel like it's condescending when it's built for kids. It's built for real kids, I guess is what I would say. My two for today are, this is not a show, but I'm still going to go with it, Zelda. And honestly, all of them, any of them, do all the Zelda-ing that you can. We just got the most recent one. We've only played for about an hour and it is darker and harder and different. When Breath of the Wild was finished, I turned to everybody and I said, there's no way anybody can ever beat this. The best they can hope for is a really good part 2. And I think that's the vibe I'm getting so far. And I am thrilled. And the kids are loving it. There's violence. The guy carries around a sword, but they have crafted it really well so that the point is problem solving and being a hero and doing what is right. And it's a very inspiring story so far. So I'm really enjoying that. The second one is a TV series called Gravity Falls. And I love Gravity Falls so much. It is witty and it is funny and it is so clever and it's absolutely absurd and ridiculous. Available on Disney+.
Cassandra, what do you have to recommend to us today?
My recommendation is the show Wild Kratts. It's one of the more highly bearable PBS kids shows. And I shouldn't rag on that too much. They have some good stuff, but Wild Kratts is great. My kids and I love watching it together. And partly because it's about saving the animals. So it's the two Kratt brothers who go around saving the animals who are in peril. And I might be inclined to be a little annoyed at that sort of thing if they were to beat you over the head with the environmentalism, make the kids feel like eco warriors who blame their parents for despoiling the planet. But it's not like that at all. It's a very light touch. They'll say things sometimes. People are really smart, but sometimes they don't get it quite right. And so they bring up that sometimes there are problems with animals and sometimes their habitat or they get hunted or things like that. But it's a light touch. They handle it really well. Plus, it's just a ton of fun. It's really entertaining, really well done. So we love Wild Kratts. Also, recently, I rediscovered, again, a PBS kids show, but Arthur, which was from my childhood. Yeah. The later seasons do have some material that I would not recommend. And there is a teacher who marries his same-sex partner. So watch out for the later seasons. I think they're still producing new shows. But the earlier seasons, man, those are golden. It's just such a good show. And the sibling relationship, the friend relationships, it's really great. So I think it's on Amazon Prime. You can find that.
I do hate that every time my kids get into a new show, I have to go figure out, is there going to be some themes in this that I don't want my kids to read? Anyway, we had to cut Ridley Jones out because there's a non-binary bison. I don't know what a non-binary bison is, and I'm not even sure how you'd even be able to bring that up, but it was there. So I was like, nope, no Ridley Jones for you.
We were caught off guard just recently. My wife was telling me about this. We were actually talking about Rick Riordan, and my kids have loved the Percy Jackson series. But apparently he has one that's built for older young adults, not so much tweens, but older kids. And there's just a lot of same-sex sexual tension. And he looked at the other guy and it was and I was like, oh, that's fine. We just won't pick that series. But then they bundled it together with a bunch of other kids' books. And so my son's like reading these at 10. And I'm like, that's a conversation I'm ready to not have quite yet. That's a bit older. So it's hard. We were talking about it in the context of like library bans and book bans and stuff like that. And it's like, on the one hand, let's just trust librarians. But on the other hand, I feel like we're trying to keep what our kids reading. It's really a hard uphill battle. And we're pretty chill. We don't want to remove all references to other people or anything like that. But it's like, it's really early and really young for our kids. Anyway, it's just something that's on my mind.
You do have to be really careful with PBS in general, actually, more and with some new shows. They are bringing up topics. So at the very least, be ready to talk to your kids or just do some thorough Googling before you let your kids watch it all. But Wildcrats is good so far.
All right. Usually we say we will have links to all these recommendations on our website so you can buy through these links to help support our podcast. But this is all streaming stuff, so just go have a good time and watch some good shows with your kids. We're trying to bring you the conversations about the true and beautiful in pop culture. Have some conversations with your kids about the true and beautiful in pop culture on us this time. We also wanted to shout out a recent episode from one of our Public Square Media podcasts. Liz, you want to take that?
Yeah, so the podcast I've been listening to recently, I listened to Family Bro Evening's recent episode on exploring LDS social media. This is part 1, so I have a feeling there's going to be some more parts to this series. But basically, they just are looking at the top posts, the most reacted to posts on the subreddit Latter-day Saints, and just discussing those and what it says about our online discourse as Latter-day Saints. It's interesting they take a nuanced look at online conversations in the church. So that's Exploring LDS Social Media, Part 1 on Family Bro Evening.
Is Latter-day Saints the good subreddit? I get confused which one is.
Latter-day Saints is more moderated and more positive. R/Mormon is a little bit more in between. So those are the main ones. There's your Reddit summary for the day.
And now on to our main discussion of Bluey. I really enjoyed this show with my kids. We had a fun time watching it. I know, Cassandra, you said you've watched the whole thing several times over. It was quite delightful to just post on my Facebook page and just say, hey, friends, which episodes of Bluey should I watch? And I got so many recommendations that it was a time investment to watch all of them. And I'm going to have to watch the rest of it at some point, but I did not have enough time to watch the entire show, despite your wife, Ben, recommending that to me. I crunched the numbers. I'm like, I'm sorry, I do not have time for that many hours of TV in the week and a half we had to prepare for this podcast. But it's a delightful show. I'm curious to get people's thoughts on why it has become so popular. Liz, let's have you lead out on this one.
I am also a Bluey newbie. I had watched a couple episodes with my daughter when she was sick because I'd heard of it. And then we were preparing for this podcast and I watched a whole bunch with her. And of course, she was sick again this week because this is the year of illness that will not go away. And that's another story. But it's been very interesting. It is a lot more adult friendly than some of the other shows she picks to watch, which are painful. And I leave the room and do something else. Like, I can enjoy watching it with her. It's definitely got that going for it, for sure. But I'm by far not the Bluey expert around here. So I'd love to hear from either Ben or Cassandra what their thoughts are on why this show has so much sticking power when other kids' TV hasn't as much. My kids are much more video game kids. We play a lot of video games and we don't watch a ton of TV with them, except for family movie night.
Cassandra, what do you think? Why is this show so popular?
I think Liz just put her finger on a big one, that it is something adults enjoy as well as kids. It's funny. It's really just straight up funny, not like funny for 3-year-olds. It is that too, but it's funny for adults too. I guess I should cap in that I have a kind of immature sense of humor. I like kids' jokes. I like the jokes my kids like, but I hear a lot of people say that just, I enjoy watching it with my kids. It's something the whole family just makes it this event and this thing that everyone relates to. They can all bond together over it. But then it also, just for kids too, like my 3-year-old, she has requested to watch her favorite episode like 50 million times. It's very sticky for little kids' brains too. I think they see themselves in the characters, in the situations. It's just life. It's not exotic climbs and these convoluted plots. It's just life. It's just things that a little kid would totally relate to from every day. And for some reason, that just really pulls them in and they love it.
Nathaniel Given said something that I quite like about this. He said, Bluey has the unique capacity to blend the mundane with the cosmic, with the absolute most important thing you will ever do is play a game with your kids. And they show this. One of my favorites is Sleepy Time. And it's this dream that Bingo had and letting go of the bunny. And like, I was reading, not in preparation for this, just for my own sake, like what are the 10 best episodes of Bluey? I enjoy seeing, if you read 5 of these articles, you'll find the 5 that are in all 5 of these. And then you've got a pretty good sense of what wins across the board. And Sleepy Time made it in every single one of them.
I think Sleepy Time is the highest rated on IMDb.
That makes me happy. Beautiful in the way that they set it up and all of that.
And the whole soundtrack, look.
I really do think that we have to talk about the music at some point because it is so well done. It is so good. But the reality is so one of the discussions was so funny. It just said, in the future, there will have to be a test for AI to determine whether you're a robot or not. And I think the test will be to make somebody watch Sleepy Time and see if they tear up. If not, burn them at the stake. They're clearly a robot, right? I think there's something, it's just so emotionally powerful. Now, why has it taken off? And I would give 2 arguments on this. In the early days of Pixar, some of the classics, the Pixar movies that we remember that when I wouldn't say a kid, but I was like a teenager, I was like, yeah, these are always consistently good. They claimed that they were for kids. They were 100% for adults. And they would do it in such a way that you would be able to take your kids to the movie, but the adults were laughing and enjoying it and feeling good and having a moral lesson that they felt resonated with them. So the example that I like to give is Keep Uppy. And I tell my students, because I actually use Bluey, we watch a 7-minute episode once a week. And it's really great. And I teach ed psych principles through Bluey because they are more effective than anything else that I could do. And the one from Keep Uppy is modeling. And I say, okay, show me where Bluey is modeling as you're watching. And they all raise their hands and they give me a bunch of examples of, oh, the kids are playing nicely. They're entertaining themselves. They're doing all of this. And I said, great. Who are they actually modeling for? If you're a writer on Bluey, who are you actually trying to model for? And then all of a sudden they slow down and they watch and they see that the mom takes time to spend time with it. When Bingo bumps into the table, some dirt spills and Chili walks over and picks it up and puts it back, dusts her hands, doesn't say another word, but she cleans it up right then and there, right? When dad comes in, he is doing the laundry. What does that say about the family dynamic? The whole point of the show is to model for adults what good parenting can be. And that's the wholesome philosophy behind it. The reason why we love it is because it makes us want to be good people. We want to love our kids and teach them and parent the best that we know how. So if you ask me, that's really the core of what makes Bluey, is that we want to be good parents and we want a guide of how to do that.
That is 1,000% true, that it's modeling the best, the aspiration of what parenting can be, but it also has so much room for the parts of parenting that you're just not going to get 100% right when you are trying to keep 2 crazy little kids alive every day. Just like the scenes where they're all riding together in the car and you look back in the back seat where Bluey and Bingo are and it's filthy. It's covered in snacks and wrappers and markers and all of that. It's aspirational, but it's also, yeah, your car's going to be a mess and you're going to have a messy playroom and the kids are going to not want to tidy it up. And it just blends all of that so well that you need to play games, you need to clean up, you need to be there for your kids, but your life is going to be crazy as well.
That reminds me of one of my favorite episodes, which is the baby race episode, which as the stay-at-home parent hit home for me. Although we talked about this in our last episode too, I as a stay-at-home dad can get away with things that stay-at-home moms can't get away with because they're like, oh, the kids aren't dead. That's great. But just the competition, I don't know, maybe that's a combination of just me being myself and the fact that there are interesting and different pressures on me as a stay-at-home dad. I've never felt like I needed to compete with other kids and other parents. And it's not something that's ever really occurred to me or that I really ever gave any much emotional weight to. But as I watched the mom go through that and have to unlearn this thing that she had put upon herself to make sure that her kid wasn't going to be the one who walked first, it struck home to me about how there are lots of ways to parent. And I loved the ending of that where the mom with the 8 kids says, you're doing fine because they're all different and it's okay to not care about these things as much as you are caring in this moment. And I liked that a lot, that it gives parents room to, I don't want to say fail, but room to be human and to have realistic expectations.
To not have it all together.
While still holding a really high bar. Now, I think this is a really hard balance to strike, and Bluey nails it, right? In education, we call this the error-rich environment, right? Kids should make mistakes. They should make the right ones and they should learn from them, right? It's very important. But if you try and create a classroom where there are no mistakes made, there's also no learning happening, right? And so one of the things we really have to build is this culture of error where it's like, hey, if you're trying your best, it's going to work out fine, but you really do have to try your best. No one's going to look at Bandit and Chili Healer and be like, yeah, they're slouches. You see the back of their car, right? And they are prioritizing the right things and sending a signal of, you can do this too. This is possible. But also, it's about what's important and what's not. The reason why that emotional climax of the baby race is so powerful is because every parent resonates with that so deeply. No 5-year-old is watching that and going, yeah, my mom is doing okay. Like, the message isn't for them. It's a kid's show, right? No, it's not. It's an adult's show. But like, I know the background of Chili and Bandit Healer because that's my life right now. That's where I am, and I'm really comfortable making some sacrifices. And one of them is like, my pop culture knowledge is really limited to what my 3 and 6 and 7 and 10-year-old watch and do. But the message that Bluey sends as a show is, you can be an awesome parent, and here's what it takes to be an awesome parent. And there's going to be lots of mistakes and lots of messiness. Just try your best. I think that's a really healthy message for parents to give a model. The other thing I was going to say really quick, when you have so little supply, even one good jewel seems like it's amazing because everybody is so thirsty for it. The number of times I've told just Carl and Liz on this podcast, dads are portrayed as either Darth Vader or Homer Simpson. And to see a dad trying and getting it basically right, and to be a model for that and be like, oh, I could do that. Oh, hey, I could do that too. It makes it feel like it's doable, and it's something, and like that being a dad can be honorable and good and healthy, and like that family life can be a good thing. There are actually some philosophies behind this. That Bluey wins the culture wars, right? But there are some things that it's saying that I think are powerful. You could have a show like Bluey that is trying to tell parents the same things and get completely wrong because it gets the philosophy wrong. But it nails the philosophy on things like growth mindset, on things like error-rich environment. And try your best. That's a lot more important than the day-to-day ups and downs and that kind of stuff.
I gotta say, I also loved Bandit. I think that I was comparing him also to the closest American show I could think of, which was Daniel Tiger, which is fine. You're right, Ben, that Bluey is much more directed at parents, whereas Daniel Tiger is directed at kids. And if you notice, his parents on that show are pretty much interchangeable. They have zero personality at all. They're just like spouting generic parent wisdom with no personality. One of the things that I did notice while I was watching Bluey is that the dad is the joker. He teases the kids a lot. He's roughhousing with the kids. And the mom has a different personality. And yet they're both good parents. And that's okay. I feel like the idea that parents have personalities, and those personalities don't have to mean they have a different parenting philosophy and that they're arguing all the time about how to raise the kids. They just do it differently, and that's okay. Moms and dads are different, and it's good that kids have them both.
I love that you brought up Daniel Tiger. I hate Daniel Tiger. Daniel's a sweet kid. His parents have a lot of good ideas, but when my oldest watched it several times when she was younger, it turned her into this smug little life coach that was really annoying.
That is exactly Daniel Tiger.
Mommy, you need to take a deep breath and count to 4. And I'd be like, you're just a Daniel Tiger. And that's unnatural, right? That's just not how kids really are. And it's great to teach them some strategies for emotional regulation. That's fine. But that's just not how kids usually are. Maybe there are some exceptional sage children out there that none of them live at my house. Bluey definitely has a lot of really striking insight and moments of transcendence, but it comes through it so naturally by letting kids just be bananas and having their craziness and their rowdiness and all of that. And yet it still manages to come up with the insight instead of this artificially Daniel Tiger-esque, let's all pretend we have PhDs in psychology and just pretend we're a 4-year-old child. No, that
Okay.
it doesn't ring true at all.
Really quickly, I will go to the map for Daniel Tiger, but they serve different purposes.
Yes.
They fundamentally do. And here's how I know, because my 10-year-old, when he was like 5 or 6, and I was like, hey, let's go and watch let's watch Daniel Tiger together as a family. He was like, no, that's for babies. I was like, you're 6. What are you talking? It's for you. And the littler kids, like the 3-year-old was like, nah, it's for babies, right? It's like they could feel that it was moralistic and finger pointing. Now, I think it's really good for the young kids. It teaches a lot of good lessons. I think the jingles are really adorable. But at the end of the day, I think the difference with Bluey is it feels like it's teaching to adults as well. The humor is higher level. It's harder to grasp. Frankly, I don't think there is any humor in Daniel Tiger. Like, it's just, I'm King Friday. Welcome to my kingdom. Like, it's just very flat when you really think about it. There's a lot of goodness poured into that. And it very much feels like it's written by PhD psychologists, whereas Bluey feels like it's written by good people that are just trying their best to be good parents.
And it's written by parents, right? Like, it's explicitly modeled after the main writer and his family, because he's got 2 daughters the same age, and his brother, who actually does voice Bandit's brother, has 2 slightly younger kids that are both girls as well. And so it's autobiographical in that sense. I wanted to get one plug in on Cassandra's point about how it portrays children accurately. I love that it shows them running around all the time, doing imaginative play. The thing that it reminded me the most of was actually Calvin and Hobbes.
That is a great comparison.
I know that Calvin's a little older than Bluey and Bingo are, and the medium of the comic strip allows you to see Calvin pretending to be Spaceman Spiff or Stupendous Man or whatever he's pretending to be that day. But the idea that the children are just immersed in this imaginative world all the time, and they're playing these things and coming up with these stories, and that's how they approach so much of their life at that age, rings very true to me. But I like that it portrayed childhood accurately. They're not like the wisecracking kids from the Cosby Show or something. Like those kids don't exist. Or when we talked about in our last episode, Rory from the Gilmore Girls, like no 13-year-old has like ever talked like that.
Turning kids into little pop culture prodigies it's just like what so many shows do. And I think that is why Bluey stands out, that they don't. They just let these kids be crazy pants little kids.
I think another thing about Bluey is that it's very story focused. Each episode is very much a story. It is getting across, like you said, cosmic truths or parenting truths about real life, but it's doing it through a really good story that stands on its own as a story. And this is something that has been the bane of my existence as a parent reading picture books, because there are so many picture books on the market that are trying to get a good message into kids, but they don't do it through a story. They just have an entire 20-page children's book that's like, you are great. Speak up and use your voice. And I'm like, this does absolutely nothing for me. I will never read this book again because it has no staying power just as a message. But if you give me something like, say, Roxaboxen, which is a great picture book about kids making an imaginary town and tolerance and learning to negotiate relationships with each other. Or my other favorite is Big Sister, Little Sister, which is really hard to find. It's out of print, but it's about a big sister and a little sister, and the big sister's bossy. She's also helpful. And one day little sister gets sick of it. She runs away. And then she sees that big sister is worried about her and vulnerable, and she comes back and apologizes, and they get along. But it does that all instead of having a book that just says, we have to get along with our siblings, even when they boss us around. Nobody wants to hear that. But if you tell it through a story, it sticks. And I think that's something that Bluey does really well.
There's a Bluey episode for that. You just basically described dance mode, how everyone keeps taking advantage of Bingo and she just says yes because she hasn't figured out how to say no. And then they all have to realize, oh, we are speaking for Bingo instead of finding out what Bingo really wants. So good. Yeah, there's so many times that I've been like, oh, there's a Bluey episode for that. Because there is.
We've now mentioned all of my favorite. I had a list of 5 that I wanted to make sure we brought up, and you've hit 4 of them. We'll see if we get to the 5th one by the end. I wanted to say, I mentioned earlier, like Bluey wins the culture wars. And I really think that this is an important piece. I think people watch this and they feel like they're watching something neutral, but it is not neutral in any meaningful sense. And one of the examples of this is Bluey setting boundaries is really good and really healthy. And it is the consensus among, I think, therapists, which I think is great. But this is not a small deal. This is not somebody saying you need to validate somebody else and you need to do what they ask you to do. They're taking a stance on this stuff. And it's a really healthy, very well thought out stance. The one that I love is actually Pass the Parcel. This is like one of my favorite of all of them because Pat, who's known as Lucky's dad, has the harder rules. And the kids hate it at first and they all cry. And he's in the 90s. That's how we did it. And then the other parents are like, it's not the 90s anymore, Pat. And as it turns out, the kids like it more because they don't all get gifts. And it's this incredible thing. The other one that I really like is Bandit is always saying, it's a good thing you're tough. Instead of saying, I'm going to shield you from things that are hard, his response is, well, it's a good thing you're tough. Like talking about a foundationally important message for kids today. It's like totally vibing with Jonathan Haidt, right? Like coddling. We got to raise our kids to be able to do hard things. That like there are messages in here that I think resonate with people because they feel right. Not just because it's a cute show with good music, though I think both of those things are true. But there are truths in here that I think people are picking up on and going, yeah, actually, that's a really good message that we all feel good about.
You can do hard things is what I tell my kids.
Where in that episode, Bluey is saying that it's really tough to get her drawing right. And the takeaway catchphrase is, drawing is tough, but it's a good thing you're tough. Yeah, I love that. I wrote that to my kids.
Resiliency all the way, right? Like just exactly what I think is needed in the culture right now.
I don't know how education wonky we want to get, but we could talk about Bluey's preschool. When I've watched, I believe Calypso is the first episode that I watched where it's in the preschool. And I was like, this feels very alternative preschool.
Bluey's supposed to be 6 years old at that point. This is like Bluey's first grade. It's not even in preschool.
Oh, is it first? It could be last half of kindergarten.
Except that Bingo has her kindy that she goes to. I don't know how much the categories from Australia carry over to here, but like Bluey is 6 turning 7. So even older than preschool, and she hasn't learned how to read yet.
I love Calypso because it's go play, skin your knees, touch grass, make mistakes, get into fights, and then learn how to resolve them. To Carl's point earlier about imaginative play, that's what kids should be doing. The fact is, like, we educate really well. And the scary thing is we probably educate our kids out of some of the things like creativity, out of some of the things that we want them to be able to do just as the natural way that we have our school system set up. The real conversation is what is developmentally appropriate for kids. Pre-K is very controversial because it's political. Here's what's not controversial. Kids should be playing more. They should be doing a lot less of formal academic instruction. And a lot of that should be creative and in teams and having fun. That's really easy, basic child development 101 stuff. And we're slow to pick up on the pace. And I think Bluey is addressing that in some way.
Yeah. And I actually went and Googled this, and I've been watching Bluey for a long time, and I've just been curious about some of it. And in America, there's the Waldorf schools. The Australian equivalent is the Steiner schools, founded by a man named Rudolf Steiner. And it's a bit of a weird journey if you do Google. He was the weird dude with some weird beliefs, but basically it's Waldorf for Australia. And they bring up in one of the episodes in Barky Boats in season 2, Bluey does not know how to read or write, even though she's 6 years old. And not that 6-year-olds are like totally literate and fluent. Usually most 6-year-olds here, they've started being able to write their letters, and some words at least they can read on a pretty low level at least. But like Steiner, they're committed. That is the thing. They are totally committed that they do not do academic instruction until the kid is like 7 years old. And the creator of Bluey said that this is something that's true to life for his family, that they had their kid in a play-based school. And then when they switched her to a more academic environment, like just the light shut down, and she just was where she had been thriving. Now she was just like, I hate this. I have to go to this place that I don't like anymore. So they put her back in a play-based school, and she was thriving again. And it does just feel like such a strange message to hear, especially between the 4 of us. We have a lot of advanced degrees, and you're like, your kid needs to be learning stuff. Your kid needs to be on track to achieve and to push forward and get through more school faster. But that depending on which research you read and which school of thought you go with, there is a swing in the pendulum right now toward the Bluey philosophy that kids have no business sitting at a desk and being taught at such a young age. They ought to be playing.
3 and 4-year-olds should probably be a lot more engaged in other things developmentally. I'm not an educational psychologist. I'm not a developmental expert, but all of the people I know who I trust the most in these topics, who are actual experts, are looking at this and going, kids need to touch grass. Kids need to play. They need to have fun. They need to make mistakes. They'll catch up on all the others. As long as it's not something like dyslexia or they've got a disability you don't know about, those are the reasons why you got to keep an eye on that. If there's something slow going with progress, be aware. If it's not something medical or there's a disability, the evidence seems to be pointing to the fact that they're going to be okay long term, right? That they're going to be just fine. Let kids be kids.
I think the academics is not the problem. The method is the problem. I send all my kids to Montessori preschool because it does similar things to Waldorf, but it does allow for that academic element, but it's completely led by the child's interest. And I think that's the problem with the early academics in preschool, is the forcing of interest. But what I did notice that felt familiar to me from my experience with Montessori school is Calypso. It's not a play-based school in that we just let the kids play all day and it's essentially daycare. She is very carefully seeding ideas of how things can connect and like pushing the kids to go a little further. It's not a play-based school where we just hang out all day. It's carefully structuring your play and helping push your play in positive directions. So I think there's a difference between play-based and a very trained environment like Montessori or Waldorf or Steiner schools provide. They have very tough training for teachers to help them learn how to do that kind of thing, to teach preschoolers in a way that's developmentally appropriate for them, even though it looks like they're just playing.
And I would tend to doubt that kind of thing could scale up very much. What would you think, Ben? If all of a sudden our culture just decided that, yes, this is how we need to educate our preschoolers, could we find enough millions of Calypsos to be able to pull that off?
Nothing works faster at killing something really good than trying to scale it and bureaucratize it and standardize children. And I think the solution to that is not to try and bet on the horse. It's to bet on the race and the structuring of the race, which is a long way of saying school choice, right? Give families the chance to choose and they will suss out, this feels right to me. This makes sense to me. This fits for my kids. That's my private political opinion. I'm sure all the writers of Bluey are completely on my side on this, but it's something that I feel really strongly about.
I don't know. Australia is a little bit different than the US politically, it feels like a lot of the time. They come at things in a very difficult to plot on a US political spectrum way, like somewhere that's like off in the third dimension from where we think of our two-dimensional politics.
Yeah, and the UK too. It's very different mapping. I think that's a really good point. So I don't know. I don't know what their views are.
It feels like Australia has this like very strong kind of uber libertarian streak that they're just like, I do what I want, but then also more left in some ways than maybe the median American public.
I think it comes in part from having to shoot foot-long spiders off of the roof, right? Like a friend of mine just has an acronym for it, and it's just apostrophe STRAYA. And it was like a year that I knew them. I was like, I wonder what Straya means. What does Straya mean? And then I heard them say it, and they're like, Straya. It's kind of, America. And I got it instantly. I was like, oh, okay. So when there's like a monster that's going to eat you, that's Straya. Like, I get it. That makes sense.
But I do wonder, it is interesting that most of the children in this seem to be girls.
And this is maybe one critique of Bluey, is that the kids and the parents have like infinite patience. They never really get anything seriously wrong. The kids are always crazy and fun, but behave when they're supposed to. Like, and that's the point of the show. So I'm not really critiquing that. I do want to mention something about the episode Calypso. I was really appreciative of the fact that they did not try to like pretend that girls and boys play exactly the same at a young age. They don't. The girls are at a hospital and the guys are out playing warriors. And yeah, maybe stereotypical, but that's not sexist. The majority of the time, that's exactly how boys and girls play. And to your point, Liz, I would love to see like when Bluey goes to middle school or like Bluey's second cousin, the boy who was stubborn. And like, what does it look like to parent? Because I really do think we've gotten to the point now where I heard recently of something called positive only parenting, where it's like you never ever discipline, you never raise your voice, you never get upset. And listen, absolutely. If you've got kids and you're in a place where you can do that, that's fantastic. That's everybody's goal. I'm nowhere close to that. We're so worried about being authoritarian that we've basically said it's better to be neglectful and have no standards. Let's run away from being Darth Vader so much that we become Michael Scott and pat ourselves on the back for being so enlightened. I take issue with that fundamentally. I think Chili and Bandit do a really nice job in the show. They set boundaries. They do what is best for the kids, even when the kids don't like it. But I do think it doesn't answer every question.
I do have to say there is one episode that I've watched and haven't watched them all that I felt a little bit uncomfortable with, and it was Yoga Ball, where Bandit is trying to get some work done at home and the kids keep coming in and stealing his yoga ball. And he goes and plays with them and he said, okay, now I need to go get work done. And they interrupt him again. And like, he basically has infinite time to keep saying yes and playing with them and never has to go back to work. You can do that for one day, but you can't do that every day. It doesn't work that way. And we all would love to just be able to say yes every time our kids want to play with us, but that's not a realistic expectation in a family, especially if you are working from home. You do have to set boundaries. And so in that way, sometimes it feels like Bandit's a little bit unrealistic.
That to me is interesting because it just reminds me of one time where Calvin, back to Calvin and Hobbes, he calls his dad and he's like, tell me a bedtime story. And he's like, all right, we have the evil figure one with the patent infringement. And he's like, no, Dad, tell me a good bedtime story. Right? Because he's calling his dad, who's working late night as a lawyer. And it's just really interesting. Let's hit some of the sort of maybe critiques of Bluey really quick. Dovetailing off of this, when I asked my friends to give me their favorite Bluey episodes, I did have one person, a friend of mine who lives here in the area, and I just want to read her comment. I have a love-hate relationship with Bluey because honestly, what parents have the time or energy to be so perfectly perfect? They make me feel like a complete failure because I don't know how to do it so well. I couldn't if I tried. But I also love them too. Then she talks about some of her favorite episodes. The Smoochie Kiss episode is her favorite. But anytime her kids bring up Sean, she wants to tear her hair out. So I think she brings up a good point. I haven't watched all of Bluey, so I don't even, do the parents even have jobs? It seems like they're just living in a post-scarcity utopia where they can just be at home all the time and not have to deal with
independently wealthy Bluey.
Independently, right? Like your comment, Liz, about, no, it doesn't work all the time. I'm like, nope, on Monday, my kids are not going to get as much of my attention because I'm going to have to edit this podcast episode.
Can I attack this one though? Because I think there's a part of it that's very funny to me, right? I saw the big critique is there's a drive to shut down Bluey because dads everywhere feel inferior to Bandit Healer. And it's funny and it's a joke, but every one of us is, 100%. Like none of us can measure up to Bandit. Okay, but there's a part of this that I'm actually really worried about. There are people who are dismissive of Bluey on the premise that it's too hard and let's just dismiss it. That's a fairy tale. That's a fantasy. Listen, if I could pick one thing as a policy lever that would change the world, it would be better parents, folks. And I'm not like, part of what's really hard about this is that most of the people who are worried about this are trying the best they can. So telling them that they should be better parents, they're just going to throw up their hands and go, I can't do anything else. I'm already putting my whole life on the line. I can't do any more for my kids. There are people who aren't, and I don't try to get judgy, but like when I was a school teacher, the myth that we tell ourselves is every parent is trying their best, except for the ones that we have to call CPS over. It's a really uncomfortable conversation, but we've got to wake up and realize there are people out there who are not actually, and we can have the conversation of, here are the things that as a society we have agreed that are things that we value enough that, this is not like you get to decide what you do with your kids. There are some things that are not okay. And frankly, we don't have all of the answers, but we should at least be trying to aim for that. That's what I love about what Bluey does. It gives us a target. It'd be like saying, I can't stand that Jesus guy. He made it look so easy. I'm sorry, that's the point, right? There's the old story of Astrides the Just, and he's this general in ancient Greece, and he comes back from his exploits, and everybody loves him, and he's this wonderful man. And they had an odd custom at the time where they would vote one person off the island, like in a banishment, kind of in a ballot. So Astrides is walking home to his family, and he sees this man trying to make out his ballot, but he's a little older, and he's struggling. He says, here, let me help. How can I help you, good sir? He said, I'm making out my ballot. He said, great. Who should I make it out for? He said, Astrides the Just. And he's very taken aback. Of course, he has no idea that's Astrides. And he says, what did he do that made you so upset? He said, I just can't quit hearing about how great he is. So he's got to shut the man up. No, I got the name wrong. I don't think it's Astrides, but I'll look that up in a minute. There's this tendency that we have that whenever we see somebody getting it right, we try to tear them down because it makes us feel inferior. Listen, I want more examples of awesome parents with the understanding that I'm not going to measure up to Bandit and Chili either. But give me more of that. Show me more. And by the way, I know that there are people like this. There are people down the street. I swear, the 2-year-old is writing symphonies, right? There are families that you know and I know who are like getting it right effortlessly. And it's very weird. Listen, I don't want to get mad at them. I don't want to yell at them. I want to go into their house and paint myself in camo and just observe. Show me what it takes to be an awesome family. I'm not offended by that. Anyway, it's my rant. I'm done.
I love it.
So there's the episode Octopus in season 2 that is hilarious to start with. And that also, I think that was the writers taking some of this to heart, recognizing that people are like, I can never be good parents like them. And so it shows one of Bluey's friends, Chloe, comes to Bluey's house and they play this game, and Bandit is hilarious and this awesome daddy. He's the octopus and he tries to catch them. It's funny. My kids love it. But then Chloe goes home and she wants to play the game with her dad, and her dad is blah, blah. What is this game? I don't get it. But then they work it out and they figure out a way to play it that works within their family culture and how they do things. So I think that the creators, the writers of Bluey, they're cognizant of this criticism and they do try to address it. But sometimes the prescribing this gentle parenting and this Bluey-centric way of doing things, it does actually make my eye twitch sometimes. Like, Sleepy Time, I love it. It's a beautiful, wonderful, amazing episode. But oh my gosh, tell the kids to go to bed and stay there. Just that's not how I do things. I would tell the kids to go to bed and stay there. But Bandit and Chili are like, oh, we're just not going to sleep for 18 years. It doesn't have to be that way, parents. Hopefully.
Amen, sister. No. Amen. Sleep training works.
What I was just going to say, wish that we had examples of, and they've done the research on this, like families who were like brokenhearted on the other side of the door, weeping because they can hear their baby crying. And then 2 weeks later, the kid is well slept and the parents are happy and everyone is fine. And the kid grows up and has a good family. Like, these are also stories that we need to tell.
There are studies. You can read Emily Osterman's, I think that's her name, book Crib Sheet.
Oh, Emily Oster. Yes.
She's like autonomous, so of course I'm a big fan.
But yes, she has a great chapter on sleep training and how it does not hurt your kids and everybody gets more sleep and we're all happy. Anyway.
I have to go back quick and fix what I said before. It was Aristides the Just, not whatever I said.
Nerd. A lot of the stuff that people criticize too, though, I think too, just it's in service of a good story. And you can't show all of the time that the kids are at school because that's not when the magic happens. That's not when the fun times happen. You show the time that they're together as a family. One of my very favorite episodes is Fancy Restaurant. And I think it's also an example of terrible parenting where the kids set up this restaurant for mom and dad because they want mom and dad to smoochy kiss and keep the romance alive. And they make real food for them, and it's this disgusting concoction of Jell-O and meat and vegetables, and they serve it to mom, and she's gonna eat it, but then dad swoops in and saves the day, and he eats it so she doesn't have to, and then literally barfs on the lawn. And it's hysterical, and it's very touching that he's keeping the romance alive by eating something disgusting and then barfing on the lawn for her, but it's also terrible parenting. But whatever, it's great. It's a beautiful episode. So I can hold both of those things in my head at the same time. Terrible parenting, great, insightful episode.
I love that point because every episode is fantastic. Never once am I worried that I need to call CPS on the healers, right? They're so thoughtful and kind and like they're trying and they're making mistakes, but the mistakes that I would make. My fear with the criticism is if you tear down enough J.R.R. Tolkien's and C.S. Lewis's, you're going to be left with George R.R. Martin. Like, where every good guy is actually secretly like a bad guy or like shades of gray. It's like the worst thing that could come from this is like 5 different cartoons where it's like parents who are nuanced in their parenting. And I'm good. I don't need that garbage. These are parents who are genuinely decent, who are trying their best, who aren't perfect, but they're doing the best they can. And that's inspiring. It's deeply wholesome. I think we need more of that and not less.
So speaking of wholesome, can we talk about the censorship of Bluey real quick? So this was interesting. My brother, when he heard we were doing an episode on Bluey, he's, oh, did you hear about that episode of Bluey that was censored in the U.S.? The one he was talking about was one where I don't know the title of it. It's in season 3, but Bandit is trying to get in shape and exercise. It's all about exercise. But the beginning, the cold open is him sitting at the table and grabbing his stomach and saying, "Oh, I'm fat." And we can't say that in America, apparently. Yeah, and there are other ones. When I went to look it up, there has cut a lot of poop jokes, like the unicorn episodes. The unicorn is supposed to poop, and that part just doesn't exist in America. But a couple of the interesting ones were like, there's a conversation apparently in the background of an episode where Bandit is talking to another dad about getting a vasectomy, and that is not in the American version of said episode.
There's the racial issue one too, that in Flat Pack, they had the girls pretending to be like cavemen and saying ooga booga, and it's this allegory about evolution from fish to mammals to cavemen and then to space flight modern humans. And Americans would never know this. I didn't, but I guess there's this stereotype in Australia that sometimes Aboriginals were mocked as being, cavemen, lesser people. And so that really hit a sensitive nerve in Australia, and they needed to change it for that.
If I can be honest, I don't have any problem if they feel like they needed to cut that. I'll bet that there's somebody somewhere who's in charge of edits after the fact or compliance or whatever you want to call it. And frankly, I think it's almost like settling out of court, where sometimes it's just less of a battle and it's easier to just make things neat and move on. I don't think everything is some woke triumph or whatever. The one that bothers me, though, is the one about exercise. And of course, the irony here is, and I say this as somebody who's working on my weight as we speak, because I really like food. If we can't have a conversation about something that is a real and serious medical issue across the country, I don't think that it was unkind. I don't think that it was making fun of, and it was a very real parenting thing, which is, I'm giving my whole life to my kids right now. So my personal health is not the top priority sometimes. The fact that they were talking about that and modeling that in a good way, I'm really sad that it felt like we had to cut that out. Like I said, some of the other choice I can respect. It doesn't bother me, and that's fine. But when it comes to exercise and feeling some amount of desire to be better, I actually think that's the exact kind of thing that we need to be talking about right now.
I would agree with that 100%.
And also just that's how normal people act and think. And I wish there was more room in popular culture for normal people and normal thoughts and actions instead of putting everything through the lens of, say, Twitter. It just feels like they were taking away something that is highly normal and turning it into something that is just this exquisite preoccupation of a very small slice of people.
Even Bluey is not free from controversy.
I will say this. Kudos to the writers and the producers and everybody else who have to deal with this stuff. And may I never be the person who is up in arms over something that is actually good or at least neutral. And people are doing the best they can most of the time. Not every time, but most of the time. Anyway.
Yeah. That's a good way to wrap up our thoughts here on parenting and kids that are maybe a little too perfect and parents a little too perfect. And are we aiming for this? Is it unrealistic? Whatever else. You know what? It's good to have something to aspire to. And for all you parents out there, you can do hard things too. All right, let's move on to our reading segment. Let's do this a little more lightning round because this doesn't, quite seem to fit the normal ratings anyway, but we go through clean versus objectionable material, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, outer darkness. Does anybody have objections to me just saying celestial and we just move on?
We need to specify which degree of the celestial kingdom because we all know it's worth of the three, right? That's right at the...
All in favor, so signify.
Our second rating is artistic merit, skillful, effective use of craft. We rate things on 1 to 5 popcorn balls. Let's go around the horn on this one really quick, though. Let me phrase it this way. Why are you going to give it 5 popcorn balls? Cassandra, we'll start with you, actually. And you could rate it something not 5 if you want. I was just joking there.
Can I give it more than 5? No. Honestly, I just really love this show, and it's meant a lot to my family. I think why it merits 5 popcorn balls is because it is the only show of which I am aware that get genuine, both really high-level comedy and really deep insight out of the plain fact that small children are insane. And it's just great. I need to bring up Muffin. You can't talk about Bluey without bringing up Muffin. She is the 3-year-old cousin. She is hysterical. I just think about like the sleepover episode where she's missed a nap and she's just like stumbling around and she's, you stop, door, stop. I just love it so much. Children are bananas, and Bluey takes that and makes something just magical out of it. And I love it. I don't know anyone else who's ever done that.
Liz, what do you think? 1 to 5 popcorn balls, or why is it 5 popcorn balls?
I'm going to give it 5 popcorn balls. And I don't think we talked about it all about the animation, but like, this is high quality animation when there's so many kids shows where you can see the holes in the animation, or like the computer animated characters look like just a little bit creepy and it doesn't quite work. Like Bluey, it's beautiful to watch.
And I will say 5 as well. As a teacher, I'm impressed by 2 things. I love the music. We already mentioned that. But it is so much harder to give a 15-minute lesson than a 45-minute lesson. And every one of these 7-minute videos is just perfect. There isn't another thing I would cut. There isn't another thing I would add. The amount of precision and the way that is delivered is just phenomenal. So in terms of craft, I think it is something to aspire to.
Like every time I watch the episode Hammer Barn and at the end they do the high five, and I'm just like, that is the platonic ideal of just the pacing and the getting everything across just so perfectly. The writing is amazing.
And the humor too. If you can't be happy with what you have, then somebody's
husband eventually gets it. Yes. I took my 2 daughters to Lowe's this morning, actually, for their little project, and they had to stop and get their paint chips, and just life is just so Bluey right now. I love it.
I'm going to give it 5 popcorn balls too. The thing that impresses me, aside from what you have all mentioned, is that if you watch carefully, it bears up repeat viewing because there are things going on in the background that you might not notice your first time. I know at one point we mentioned that like Bingo knocks some dirt off and then runs away. So the main action is Bingo and Bluey playing this thing, and Chili, the mom, just comes up and just tidies up and just walks away. And some of that is more deliberate, like in the episode Handstand, where there's just shenanigans and chaos going around while Bingo's trying to demonstrate that he can do a handstand. Or is it Bluey? Anyway, but sometimes it's very subtle, and that shows a level of attention to detail that I find lacking in a lot of media these days. So that's one of the things I'm going to say to give it 5 popcorn balls. There are a lot of TV shows I think you could just put on and stick your headphones in and be cooking and listen to it as like a radio play. This is not one of those. That is to their credit, I think. All right. Our last is Gospel Connections, Morally Edifying Messages, 1 to 5 apricots. I would be curious to see if you could give an example of an episode that taught a lesson that you really liked or enjoyed, aside from maybe the ones, or just repeat one that you've already said. And I'll go first on this one. I really love the camping episode where he meets Jean-Paul, the little dog who speaks French, and they have a great time together. And then Jean-Paul's family leaves the campsite a day or 2 before Bluey's family does. And they had this great time together, even though they did not speak each other's languages, and they still met and connected. It just reminded me on my mission once, where a Spanish-speaking lady had been baptized in our ward there in Poughkeepsie, New York. And we did not have a Spanish ward or a Spanish branch there at the time. She was baptized into the English ward. We had a couple people who had served in Spanish-speaking missions, and we were going to try to integrate her into the ward as best as possible. But when she got baptized, after all the adults were hanging out and eating cookies and doing all their sort of stuff, the kids were just having to run it. And that was an example to me of why we should all become as little children. It did not matter that these kids did not speak the same language. They had a great time. And so this episode reminded me of that. Plus, just the touching ending where they reconnect later on as teenagers, I thought was really wonderful. So that thought of you can even play with kids who you do not understand or speak the same language was one that I found great, and is one of the reasons why I'm going to give this one 5 apricots, just overall as well, but that one particular episode stood out to me. Ben, 1 to 5 apricots, or a morally edifying message that you enjoyed from the show.
So this is one where I cannot express the 6 out of 5 on all of the things, but on this one I'm going to give it a 4. And the reason is because it is still just a little bit captured by the current culture. And we mentioned it before about like positive parenting and just letting the kids set the boundaries and set the tone and things like that. Now, 4 really does mean 4 out of 5. They do phenomenal work. Short of preaching the gospel itself, I'm not sure that they could really do better. But at the end of the day, there are a few things that I think I would love to see a little bit more of. Not just sleep training your kids can be good, that some amount of nipping issues in the bud and setting strong routines with kids is a good thing, not a bad thing. I think there are a lot of messages like that that are a little bit missing because of the way that the current culture is constructed. And more importantly, I don't want to say a 5 out of 5 unless it is making me want to be a better disciple and a better Christian. And it does that to some extent, but it's not explicit. There is certainly a religious aspect to the show sometimes, definitely a moral aspect. But it would be really cool to see what's the episode where it looks like they're about to pray at the dinner table and then they don't.
Favorite thing.
Yeah, and it's great, but also I would not be offended if they were a Jewish family or if they were a Muslim family. And that was a chance to normalize some of that stuff that I felt was past. And it doesn't offend me. Every family that I see on TV, I assume is an atheist. I don't know why that's a working assumption, but that is kind of the working assumption. I would have no problem if they made that a more real part of where they're coming from on this stuff. And again, while they do take some strides in the right direction, I think that there are some areas where they could go even harder on. And I don't know, maybe that destroys what Bluey is about. That really does enter it into the culture wars and we need to leave it alone.
You've actually reminded me that my approach to this particular rating of ours is not to give it 5 unless there's an explicit gospel connection. So maybe I should drop mine down to 4 on that point as well.
Now, on the other hand, do I think that this does more good or The Chosen does more good? And honestly, I think that's a toss-up, right? I think that this is a message intended for people in a way that's meaningful. But the other thing I just wanted to mention, because you asked us to talk about something that we watched that we really enjoyed, is just the way that it takes parenting and exalts it. And it says that Bingo and Bluey are not perfect kids. They are not the best kids. They're not the smartest kids. They're not even the most loving kids. They're good kids. And that is holy and special and cosmically important in some way. That, I think, is something that they get right. And again, the number of episodes where they're putting furniture together or doing something totally blasé, and it becomes this deeply important thing where you start to realize, like, it isn't getting away from the mundane to find the transcendent. It is finding the transcendent in the mundane. And I think that's a message that I think, for me, is really meaningful at this part of my life where I've got some young kids in the house.
Cassandra, gospel connections, morally edifying messages. What do you think?
Dang it, Ben just pretty much stole mine. It was basically that. I will go back to the episode Fancy Restaurant. Just how now I'm feeling the peer pressure about the rating too. Can I give it a 5 if it doesn't have an explicit gospel connection?
You can give it a 5.
I'm going to, because of the way I think that, and it's not that there are no really enthusiastic portrayals of families in pop culture. In fact, I mean, there's even kind of this feeling that parenting is hip in a way. Kids are like this cute lifestyle accessory for some shows and movies. But this doesn't do this. This promotes parenting and loving, cohesive families in a way that takes into account the fact that it's gross, it's frustrating, it's maddening, it's bananas. Sometimes you just look around and you're like, everything's a mess and they're screaming and totally out of control. And yet it makes all of that look extremely fulfilling. And just, this is where it's at. This is where their priorities are. This is where your joy and your meaning and your transcendence is going to come from in life, out of this. And that, like Ben said, that when you transcend the mundane, you find the joy in it and the really deep truths in it, even though it's definitely not explicitly religious. And the weird little pre-meal prayer song thing that they did in Favorite Things, I think that's actually a Steiner thing. Anyway, so it did miss out on that. But in terms of showing people that parenthood is amazing, not even in spite of, but because of all of the things that are hard to deal with at the time and that just push you to your breaking point and drain you and, I don't know, bring you down and yet exalt you the highest. So yeah, I'll go ahead and give it 5.
Liz, bring us home.
I'm going to give it 5 as well. And I'll give you my example was the episode Grannies, because I live in a family and it's probably my fault where we are all actually people who want to be right. And we break up a lot of fights with our kids over would you rather be right or would you rather keep playing with each other? And I love the way grannies solved that problem. It's not with, I'm just going to ignore it. Bluey goes and teaches her grandma how to floss, and then, yay, we can both be right. And now we can keep playing. It does it in a really happy way a kid can understand. And it was a revelation watching that and being like, here's a new way to teach this principle that my family is constantly working on and probably will be for the rest of our lives because we're a bunch of know-it-alls. So I'll give it 5.
Sounds good.
The good news with all of you who have kids reading the Book of Mormon too is that I've seen the baby race and I know I'm still doing okay.
Exactly. That is right. Thank you for joining us on Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree. I am on Twitter at Carl Cranney if you'd like to reach out and say hello. Liz, where can people find you on social media?
You can follow my writing and book reviews on my website, lizbusby.com, and all my social media links will be on there.
Fantastic. Ben, where can people get a hold of you if they'd like to reach out and get in touch?
If I'm having a bad day on Twitter, the rest of the time, Facebook, or I podcast sometimes. I'm not hard to find.
Cassandra, where can people find you?
The stuff that has my name on it, I just started dumping everything onto a Substack. So CassandraHedelius.substack.com.
It's an excellent read. Highly recommend.
Indeed. Yeah, I like a lot of your stuff there.
Well, thank
We'll have links to all of these on our show notes if you'd like to reach out or get in touch with any of us or our guests. Thanks for joining us this week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with a friend who enjoys movies and good conversation. You can also subscribe on the platform of your choice and please leave us a rating or review. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode or on any episode. Send us a message through email, social media, or on our website. It really makes our day as podcast hosts to hear from you. I'd be particularly curious to know what your favorite episodes of Bluey are and the reasons why you like them. So reach out if you have any thoughts, please. Liz, can you tell us what we will be discussing in our next episode?
All right, next time we'll be discussing Season 3 of The Mandalorian, which has some interesting religious themes and, of course, great Star Wars television, and you can stream that on Disney+, so you can be ready for that conversation in 2 weeks.
Fantastic. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.